Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions Podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. Today's episode is quite interesting because we're covering child labour. Now, if you hear the word child labour, at least in Western society, we immediately associate the word with negative connotations, and to be honest, a lot of times it's not great. But that being said, the more I researched it, I was interested to find out that there are actually reasons that child labour might be beneficial. So today we're just going to take a look and explore. And obviously we try to maintain an unbiased opinion on this podcast, so I'm going to do my best, but let's just put it this way, we're starting from a rather difficult point, but regardless of that, let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to start with the reasons why child labour might be seen as, if not good, justifiable, let's say. Now, the first and most prominent argument for at least allowing child labour is that, put simply, it might be needed. In very, very poor countries, where parents simply do not make enough money to care for their children, or in many cases where these kids simply don't have anyone to care for them, they may have to work in order to survive. If there isn't aid, if there isn't access to, say, free food and food banks and whatever else you might have, the only way to get food, get shelter, get water, get clothes and so on is to have money. And therefore, children may simply need to work to survive. And even by allowing work, it could provide them with a better quality of life. With that little bit of extra income, that could be the difference between eating one day and not eating at all. Furthermore, some may say that children might even benefit psychologically from doing work. Again, this applies to poor countries where the sad reality is that a lot of these people will be working their entire lives just to survive. But if these children start working younger, it helps give them psychological development, build social relationships with other kids and people working in the same environment as them. And if they take pride in what they do, they may feel more valued. Now, of course, one of the big arguments against child labour is that these children should be in school, not working. But once again, a lot of the people, particularly in poorer countries, learn more from work than from school. A lot of the skills that school teaches you applies to more specialised, quaternary service sector jobs, essentially. But if these people are only ever going to have the opportunity, at least in their lifetime, to say work in labour, mining, whatever it may be, if they learn the skills when they are younger, they will be better prepared for the future. If two people turn 18, one has lots of skills in manual labour, the other one knows how to write a good essay. If the only jobs are in manual labour, then obviously the children who did work are going to be better off. Now, a lot of this, of course, ignores the fact that child labour is often not pleasant, to put it bluntly. So we have to look at what is sadly a long-term truth. Child labour today may be the only way to prevent it occurring in the future. So, let's put it this way. If we ban child labour today, many poorer countries will lose a great amount of their economic capacity. If they can't get the work and the companies to come in, they will not develop, meaning everyone will stay poor. However, if children today are able to take part in some aspect in that economic and social development, it means that in the future, the economy and society will be at a higher position, meaning again, that children in the future may not have to work. It's all good saying let's give them aid, let's give them help, but if that aid doesn't ever reach them, if say there's corruption or something like that, we may just have to look at reality and say, okay, we have to allow child labour now or it will stay forever. And this really ties into a key point here. Legal and regulated child labour may be essential for children's well-being. If we banned child labour, but children were still working illegally because they had to and had no choice, that's a lot worse. But if we allow it to be legal and regulated, ensuring their safety, that mitigates many of the issues associated with it. And then finally, it's worth it's worth rather, looking at the general bias against work for children. Doing work at any age is not necessarily bad, just because, at least in Western society, we often believe that children should not be working. If children again have to work for practical and pragmatic reasons, opposing it may unintentionally be doing more harm than good. With that side out the way, let's look at the arguments opposed to child labour. Firstly, on the point of the economic argument, essentially. Child labour to some is not the solution. Yes, we have poverty, yes, we have poor people, but the answer is not making these people work. That's to some essentially a cop-out. It's shifting the blame from those responsible for helping society to the people actually suffering. And instead, we should be providing more aid, more education, more social resources to ensure that child labour is not needed in the first place. Yes, some people may need to work to survive, but that is in no regard what should be happening. On the psychological point, yes, children may benefit in some circumstances from working. However, in many other cases, their psychological development will actually be stunted. It can cause mental health issues associated with dangerous work. These people may view themselves as lesser if they're not able to go to school and get an education. A lot of the education is simply just helping them understand and work their way through the world. And if they have none of that, they never learn to read and write, they will always be trapped at the bottom of the social ladder. And this point on education is perhaps one of the most important ones. Childhood is a time for learning and growth. It is not a time for working. Children need a good education to ensure a better life as an adult. If they spend all their time working, they will be trapped at the bottom. And again, that is not what we want. Long term, development through the use of child labour is wrong. If a society is dependent on cheap and exploitative labour from children, that's rarely going to change. Yes, you might get more money into the economy, but that's just going to persist long term. It's known as a race to the bottom. All of these foreign companies will come in so long as it is cheap. But if in the future we stop allowing child labour and simply have higher paid adults working in some circumstances, then these companies might just leave. And as such, this economic argument is not as convincing to some as you might initially believe. And instead we should use again other means to develop poor nations rather than simply saying we have no choice, let's use child labour. Then on this question of can it be legal? Well, yes it can be, but even if it is illegal, that does not stop the fact that there is high amounts of exploitation and abuse. Many children are underpaid and forced to work in dangerous conditions because they are children. They do not have the mental faculty to rationale the fact that they are being exploited, and this means that employers in many cases will continue to exploit them whether or not it is legal by the state. And in many cases these poorer states simply lack the resources to maintain regulations that they themselves might set. And finally, we come back to this apparent bias against work. Well, the real question to ask here is, should children be working? And to some, the very clear answer is no. Childhood is a time for education, learning, playing and growing, not a time for work. Many of these people again have the sad reality that they will be working for their entire lives. And even in Western society, people will have to work for 40, 50 years nowadays. And so that childhood time is essential to build them up to that point, to allow them to become well-rounded and healthy people, and not have to spend their entire life suffering under work. The key point of contention here is essentially how the world is versus how the world should be. Many of those supporting child labour may not necessarily support it inherently, but instead would argue, okay, we have no choice. These children, if they don't work, they will die. Therefore, in the short term, we should at least allow them to work so they may not need to have children working in the future. Others, however, are sceptical that may even work, and argue that just because the world is a certain way doesn't mean we should continue to allow it to be so. Instead, we should change and provide aid. This economic argument, again, really depends on this. Some believe children have to work to be able to survive and have a better quality life, and others believe that making them work is the wrong solution and may not even be that beneficial long term. Yes, they may be working, but if they're constantly exhausted, it's not great for their well-being either. Psychologically, some believe working may be good for the children. It may set them up for what they're going to be doing the rest of their lives. Others, however, believe that it's bad. Again, childhood is for growing and learning, not for working. Educationally, some believe that, again, in the reality of these situations in poorer countries, they don't need education, they need work-related skills, and so working from a younger age sets them up for that. Others, however, believe that you're essentially dooming these people to the same standard of life their entire lifetime, and instead we should be teaching them the skills to become more educated and well-rounded individuals for the future. Then on that point of the future, some believe that child labour today stops it occurring in the future through allowing better economic development. Others instead believe that developing through the use of child labour is wrong and exploitative, may not even work, and creates a reliance on cheap labour, which when removed simply sends the economy back to how it was before. On the question of can this be legal and regulated, well, some would say yes. If we have it regulated, it provides all the benefits of child labour without exploitation. But others believe that there will always be exploitation, either because again they're children, so it's far easier to exploit them, and the fact that poorer states lack the resources and infrastructure to ensure their regulations are adhered to. And let's be honest, a child's not going to be suing anyone anytime soon, or at least very rarely. And finally, the bias against work. Some believe that work, if necessary, is not a bad thing regardless of age, and others believe that children should not be working. It's not a bias against work, it's a moral truth essentially to some that it's wrong to have children working. There are really two questions we must ask at the end of the day. Again, number one, should children work because they need to, or is that a cop-out? And what does it really mean to be a child? Is it a time to ensure your future survival, or is it a time to set you up for a better adult life? These are the two key points of contention, and again, there is a very small sect of people who would really, at least openly, argue that child labour is a good thing, and I doubt anyone beyond those who benefit from it would say illegal and exploitative child labour is bad. But it does really highlight the question of if it's possible to have it legal and regulated, and if there is really no other choice, is child labour always as infinitely bad as most, in particularly Western society, would immediately believe? Well, that's all I have for you today. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments or on Twitter. Be sure to check back next Monday for another episode. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you soon.